Welcome to today's deep dive. Imagine you're trying to map an entirely new operating system onto your brain, but the only manual you have is a video of someone putting jam on toast.
Right, which sounds totally ridiculous when you put it like that.
It really does. But, today we're actually dissecting a transcript from the Mr. English channel, and it features these two individuals, Emily and Paul, who are literally just outlining their daily routines.
Yeah, it presents itself as this very standard beginner conversational English lesson.
Exactly. But we're looking past that basic vocabulary today. We want to examine the underlying linguistic architecture. Like, how do these really simple, mundane actions construct a learner's ability to communicate their reality?
Because the intention here is to break down the actual mechanics of human existence. I mean, from the transition out of sleep all the way to the return to unconsciousness.
Yeah.
We're looking at why curriculum designers choose to anchor abstract grammar to the highly predictable sequence of a daily routine, rather than, jumping straight into complex or specialized vocabulary.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the structure of a day, and really the structure of a language, we have to start at the exact moment consciousness begins.
The very first moment, yeah.
Both Emily and Paul, they share an incredibly similar morning sequence in this video. Emily states, "I wake up," noting she does this precisely at 7 a.m.
Right, very exact.
While Paul, he admits to the same action, but he includes this great little detail about hesitating. He says he stays in his warm bed for an extra minute or two before braving the day.
Which is very relatable.
So relatable, and then they physically get out of bed, they wash their faces. Emily actually explicitly uses cold water to shock herself awake, and then they both heavily emphasize the act of brushing their teeth.
Right.
But I have to ask you this. If I'm an adult trying to learn English for, let's say, a new corporate job, right?
Okay, yeah.
Spending week one learning how to say, "I brush my teeth" or "I wash my face" feels almost, I don't know, patronizing. Like, why wouldn't a curriculum skip the bathroom entirely and just start straight in the boardroom where the language is actually needed?
Well, what's fascinating here is how these intensely physical rituals bypass the intellectual resistance that adults usually bring to language learning.
Intellectual resistance.
Yeah. When you introduce an adult to a foreign grammatical structure, a new syntax, or unfamiliar verb conjugations, the cognitive load is just massive.
Because it's too abstract.
Exactly. Abstract rules feel untethered and they're intimidating. But by anchoring a fundamental subject-verb-object structure, something like "I wash my face," to a daily physical reality, the curriculum completely re-engineers that learning dynamic.
Oh, wow. So you're mapping unfamiliar vocabulary onto deeply ingrained muscle memory.
That's precisely it. You take the abstract concept of a verb and you attach it to the actual shock of cold water hitting your face at 7:05 a.m.
Or linking the English word brush to the literal sensation of bristles against your gums.
Right. The grammar becomes a sensory experience rather than just some formula written on a chalkboard. It creates a baseline of cognitive confidence for the learner.
Because they already know how to do the action.
They perform these actions every single day, completely, regardless of their cultural background. Staring into a bathroom mirror is a truly universal human experience.
That makes so much sense.
When the language curriculum aligns with that undeniable shared physical reality, it lowers what we call the affective filter.
Like the stress barrier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about that hesitation Paul feels about leaving his warm blankets. That is a universal psychological state.
Oh, absolutely.
The learner sitting at home recognizes that shared reluctance immediately. It builds empathy, signaling to the brain that this new foreign language is really just a different way to describe a reality they already intimately understand.
Which explains why the early stages of language acquisition lean so heavily on the mundane. It's like pouring the concrete foundation of a house.
Yes.
You have to pour the concrete in the bathroom before you try to build the walls of the boardroom.
Perfect analogy.
But that universal foundation, it doesn't last long, does it? The day inevitably splinters based on individual choices, which forces the vocabulary to expand.
It has to, yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because once that morning foundation is laid, the source material shows Emily and Paul's routines diverging quite sharply. Basically, the moment they step into the kitchen.
Right. The curriculum introduces choice here. So Emily opts for efficiency. She eats a fast, popular cereal with milk and has a cup of tea.
Keep it moving.
Exactly. But Paul leans into a slightly more involved process. He prefers coffee with little milk and one sugar paired with toast and butter or strawberry jam.
Sounds like a nice breakfast.
Yeah.
But then the divergence widens even more during the commute. Paul drives a car, it's a 20-minute journey, and he explicitly notes his dislike for the traffic.
He absorbs the friction of the road before his workday even begins.
Right. Whereas Emily takes the bus, and she describes the process as easy, using that transit time as a buffer. She reads a book or listens to music and podcasts.
She's carving out personal time.
Yeah. Which brings us to their actual workplaces, which are starkly contrasted in the lesson. Paul sits quietly at a desk in an isolated office, right? He's just with a computer and a phone.
Very insulated.
Meanwhile, Emily works as a shop assistant, so she's constantly talking to people, very active, repeating phrases like, "Hello, can I help you?" So I'm wondering, does this method of commute and the nature of the workplace dictate the mood of the entire workday? Or is there a deeper sociolinguistic strategy at play here?
Oh, definitely a deliberate strategy. The language lesson cleverly introduces these comparative lifestyles to force the learner to navigate contrasting environments.
Okay, how so?
Well, it places the passive, quiet, isolated nature of Paul's tech-heavy office work directly against the dynamic, highly social nature of Emily's retail job.
Right.
This isn't just about providing a list of nouns like computer versus shop. It's about equipping the learner with a multidimensional vocabulary. They need the words to reflect completely different social and professional realities in the real world.
Oh, I see. It teaches the language of the knowledge worker alongside the language of the service worker.
Exactly. If the lesson only tracked Paul's day, the learner would be linguistically stranded if they walked into a busy retail environment, or if they needed to explain public transit.
They wouldn't have the words for it.
Right. By oscillating between Emily and Paul, the source provides the building blocks for navigating different scenarios. Think about the interpersonal dynamics you need to master.
Yeah, you need the vocabulary to complain about the stress of driving in traffic.
And you need the phrasing to describe the sheer exhaustion of managing retail customers all day. The contrast itself serves as the curriculum.
It really prepares you for the friction of the real world. Because you might be an Emily who uses public transit or a Paul who works in an office. The lesson gives you the modular pieces to construct your specific identity.
Precisely.
And regardless of the path taken, the energy expended during that workday requires refueling, which leads logically into the afternoon slump. They both hit a hunger wall around 1:00 p.m.
Right, the midday pivot.
Yeah. Emily brings a cheese and tomato sandwich from home with an apple or banana. Paul visits a small cafe for a big salad or soup and drinks a large glass of water throughout the day.
They have to restore that physical stamina for the rest of the day.
Exactly. And they both finish work at 5:00 p.m. But upon arriving home, their very first shared instinct, the absolute first thing they do, is shed their work attire.
Yes, this is a crucial shift.
Paul puts on a t-shirt. Emily changes into a t-shirt and leggings. I just find it so funny, but profoundly true, that putting on comfortable clothes is highlighted as a major, universal step in a daily routine. Is this physical wardrobe change actually a necessary psychological trigger for relaxation?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the wardrobe change totally represents the psychological boundary between public life and private life.
Oh, interesting.
And the language lesson shifts perfectly here to match that boundary. If you review the verbs used during the work portion of the text, it's things like write, talk, help, drive.
Very active verbs.
Yes, active, outward-facing, demanding actions. They require energy. But the moment Emily and Paul step through their front doors and take off those work clothes, the grammatical tone changes entirely.
The active transactional verbs fall away. They get replaced by passive restorative verbs.
Exactly. Paul sits quietly on his sofa. He specifically mentions needing to relax and think and check his phone.
Just decompressing.
Right. And Emily goes for a 30-minute walk in a beautiful nearby park to see trees and flowers to clear her head.
So it's like shedding the armor of the workday.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
The physical act of changing clothes signals a transition out of the economy and into the domain of the self. The curriculum recognizes that navigating the world in an unfamiliar language is incredibly draining.
It's exhausting, yeah.
So by providing the vocabulary for decompression, the lesson gives the learner linguistic permission to power down. You're teaching someone that they don't merely need English to buy a bus ticket. They need the language to describe their inner emotional state.
To articulate the need for rest. To claim their own quiet time.
Yes, it validates their exhaustion.
Which brings us to the final hours of the day, the night shift. With the workday officially shed, the final hours reveal the most personal choices of all, how we feed ourselves, entertain ourselves, and prepare for unconsciousness.
The routines get very distinct here.
They really do. For dinner, Paul cooks pasta with tomato sauce or chicken with rice and vegetables, and he eats while watching the TV news to know what's happening in the world.
He stays plugged in.
Yeah, he does. Emily, on the other hand, prefers making a big vegetable soup or a quick cheese omelet, eating at the table with no TV, just listening to the radio or quiet music.
Very different vibes.
Totally. And in their free time, Emily reads books in her favorite chair, or she calls her mom and sister to connect. Paul watches comedies to make him laugh before sleep and listens to jazz or classical music.
Right.
And then we arrive at the major routine difference, the great shower debate. Paul takes a warm shower at night to feel clean before bed, but Emily takes her shower in the morning to wake up.
A classic divider of people.
The ultimate personality divider. So what does this all mean? How does the source use these gentle disagreements, dash TV versus no TV, morning shower versus night shower, to teach learners? Is it more than just reciting facts?
Oh, definitely. This raises an important question about how we define ourselves through our habits. If the lesson simply featured Emily and Paul doing the exact same things in the evening.
Like both eating soup and watching the news?
Exactly. The resulting language would just be a flat, robotic recitation of vocabulary. But by introducing these mild, polite frictions, the curriculum provides the learner with a menu of choices.
It models the mechanics of disagreement.
Yes, it demonstrates that language is about expressing distinct personal preferences. The source video explicitly concludes by telling the audience that simple sentences empower them to talk about themselves.
So the minor disagreements are actually structural tools.
They teach learners how to contrast ideas and assert their own individuality. When Emily says she prefers quiet music over television, the learner realizes they can use this vocabulary to draw their own boundaries.
That makes total sense. You have to locate yourself within the material. Like with the shower debate, you are almost forced to take a side mentally. I personally align with the morning shower protocol, like Emily.
See, I fall firmly on the side of the night shower. Washing off the day is totally non-negotiable for me before bed.
Right, but a beginner listening to that exchange can't help but form the sentence in their own mind, I take a shower in the morning, or I take a shower at night.
Which pushes the language acquisition from passive listening into active identity formation.
Wow. And then, from there, the routine moves to its inevitable conclusion. They both brush their teeth again.
Returning to that universal habit from the morning.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
put on pajamas and they go to bed. Emily at 10:30 p.m., Paul at 11:00 p.m. The cycle shuts down.
Preparing to repeat all over again.
So when you really look at it, a beginner's language lesson about daily life isn't just a basic vocabulary list at all. It's a mirror reflecting the shared human experience.
It really is.
The next time you make your morning coffee or change into sweatpants after work, you are participating in a universal script that connects people all over the globe.
We're all basically just trying to navigate our obligations and find a little quiet recovery time before we sleep.
Beautifully said. But it does leave me with one final, slightly provocative thought to ponder.
Oh, what's that?
Well, imagine an alien from another planet came down and tried to understand humanity strictly by studying these beginner language routines. What would they think our ultimate purpose is?
Wow, that's an interesting question.
Right. Would they look at us and see just an endless mechanical cycle of waking, eating, and sleeping? Or would they be able to see the hidden poetry and comfort in the simplicity of our daily lives? Definitely something for you to think about next time you're brushing your teeth. Until next time, keep unpacking the everyday.